Hello! Today we're going to be looking at one of my favourite books, Happy, Why More or Less Everything is Absolutely Fine, by one of my favourite people of all time, illusionist Derren Brown. Now, I first fell in love with Derren Brown's work when I was a teenager, and I've read this book over and over again, despite it being somewhat a hefty tome. Because as well as being written by one of Britain's wittiest minds, it's also jam-packed full of some of the most profound insight from some of the world's greatest thinkers to have ever lived. So let's dive straight in. Brown starts by addressing something that, as an illusionist, he knows a lot about, and that's the power of story. As human beings, we're very driven by the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and also the rest of the world. However, it's these stories that we tell that often influence us in sometimes very negative and limiting ways. Stories like, "Oh God, I'm so stupid," or sometimes, "Oh, I'm never going to find love," can stay with us throughout our entire lives and often create self-fulfilling prophecies that stop us from achieving the things we want to achieve. One of the key themes in Happy dates back to a Roman philosopher called Epictetus, who said that it is not things themselves that upset people, but rather their perception of those things. This is Shakespeare does nothing bad or good, but thinking makes it so. And what Brown is saying here is that you don't necessarily have to respond in a certain way to certain stimuli. Rather, the stories we tell ourselves about the things that happen in the world influence us and our happiness or discontentment a lot more than the actual thing that's happening itself. As human beings, we are excellent storytellers, but we often use these stories to deceive ourselves and others. We've all had the experience of a friend coming and talking to you about some transgression against them, and we know deep down that when we hear this story, we're only hearing one half of the story, and a half that, as Brown says, leaves the teller of it suspiciously blameless. We are all excellent at self-deception, and also deceiving others, weaving duplicity into all of the stories that we tell. Sometimes we don't even realise we're doing this. If you want to find out more about how we deceive ourselves, you can find that information in my latest video, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. Brown moves on to calmly and effortlessly dismantle what he calls the most pervasive myth of all. What is this most pervasive myth? Well, if you've ever had the displeasure of reading Rhonda Byrne's The Secret, then you might be aware of it. The law of attraction states that you are the most powerful magnet in the entire universe, and that you can attract into your life, through thought alone, all kinds of things, be it a sexy new car, a sexy new boyfriend, or a sexy new £1,000,000 check. The catch is that you're told that you must have blind faith in this, and if the things you want don't come to fruition for whatever reason, you are told explicitly that this is because you didn't have faith. You are told explicitly that it is your fault. Brown compares this to the world of faith healing, where the poor, the sick, the vulnerable are convinced to give more than they can in terms of financial donations to the healer, on the promise that this show of faith will encourage God to alleviate them of all kinds of diseases and symptoms, anything from heart conditions to cancer. Brown tells a particularly heartbreaking tale of a 13-year-old girl who had multiple sclerosis. Having watched an ad on the television where a man claimed to have been cured of the same disease, after he sent $1,000 to this healer, she raised up the money and sent it to him over the course of a year, not realizing that of course the man in the ad was just an actor. When, a year later, her condition had only really worsened, she called up the healer's team to ask why her condition hadn't been healed. The team told her it was because she had secret sin in her life. And so, she did what any impressionable, young, sick, malady-ridden and now grief-stricken young girl would do. She poured gasoline all over herself and self-immolated. Many will come rushing to defend the law of attraction, saying that they have benefited from the blind faith and determinedness that Byrne tells them to put into action, and statistically some people will succeed. However, these people who find themselves at the top of the ladder are often completely ignoring that the role that blind chance, fate, fortune, whatever you'd like to call it, has played in their success. We don't buy the books of the people who don't succeed. We don't buy the books of the losers. However, that's not to disregard the fact that sometimes it can be useful to put a small amount of determination, a little single-mindedness, and to have faith in your abilities and your aims. However, it's also important to prepare for them not working out, because sometimes life just gets in the way. Brown calls upon Arthur Schopenhauer, who said that events and our chief aims in life can in most cases be compared to two forces that pull in different directions, the resultant being the course of our life. This is Schopenhauer's way of saying that we don't have the control over our life that we might like to think. This graph shows us what the good life should be like as promised to us. Our life goes mostly up the y-axis, which is our aims and goals, with very little interference on the x-axis, which is fate, fortune, destiny, the universe, life, whatever you want to call it, things that just happen to us. If we adopted Schopenhauer's maxim, however, and recognized and appreciated and accepted the role that fortune, fate, destiny, whatever you'd like to call it, plays in our lives, then the graph would look a lot more balanced. Our goals and our aims should guide us, but we should also be aware of the role that fortune plays in our lives, and acknowledge that sometimes things just don't work out for whatever reason. It's not because you didn't try hard enough, it's not because you didn't believe in yourself enough, it's just because sometimes that's life and things don't work out. A metaphor of a game of chess is given. If you were playing a game of chess with someone, you wouldn't blindly stick to the plan that you had at the beginning of the game, because you're ignoring the fact that there's another player sat opposite you who's influencing the game in ways that you can't yet begin to imagine. You don't stick to your original plan. You change it based on the moves that that player makes, and often the game that you end up playing looks very different from what you thought it might look like at the start of the game. Brown then considers the role of wanting on our lives. We are, as Lily Allen says, weapons of massive consumption, and we spend a lot of our life comparing ourselves to other people on the basis of stuff that they have that we don't. In fact, there are whole careers that are based around making sure that you're dissatisfied with what you have in your life so that you'll go out and buy more. We run our lives on the hedonic treadmill, which essentially means that no matter what we have, we always find ourselves dissatisfied, wanting newer, shinier, faster, better, brighter stuff than we already have, only to then find ourselves dissatisfied with that slightly later down the line as well. Our wanting goes on unending. You've heard of lottery winners who, a year later, are no happier than they were before. This is hedonic adaptation, and it allows us to adapt to the good things in our life, as well as also to the bad things in our life as well. We spend our life chasing carrots only to find upon catching them that they're completely inedible anyway. We spend our lives climbing ladders only to find out that we'd put the ladder against the wrong wall this entire time. As Tim Jackson says, we spend money we don't have on things we don't need to create impressions that won't last on people we don't care about. So now we have a bunch of problems. Poor storytelling, a relentless pursuit of positivity, and an unending capacity for desire. Life seems to be all doom and gloom, but not so fast, says Brown as he guides us through the next part of his book, Solutions. Brown tells us that it is regaining authorship over our lives that will bring us happiness, or at least contentment. This doesn't mean, of course, being in control of things in our life, because often we're not, but rather controlling what we can, which is how we perceive those things. Daniel Kahneman of Thinking Fast and Slow fame says that we have two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. It is our remembering self that largely guides the way we view ourselves and the story we tell ourselves. In fact, some of the most meaningful moments in our lives can be quite unpleasant for the experiencing self. Brown suggests that we pursue the considered life, one in which we sit down and evaluate who we are, the things we like and dislike, ideas that resonate with us, stories that we tell about ourselves. Brown draws upon ancient Stoic beliefs by saying that one of the first things we can do is start to become aware of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, others, the world, and by recognizing, as the Stoics believed, that there is nothing good or bad, and only thinking makes it so. And by doing this, we can start to feel a little bit calmer about things. Brown stresses the idea of relinquishing this idea of control over things that we never really had control over anyway. And this has been the key takeaway that I've had from this book over the last 4 years since I first read it. According to the Stoic philosophy that Brown bases most of his book upon, you're only in control of two things in your life: your thoughts and your actions. Everything else from other people's thoughts about you, whether you get the promotion at work, whether that cute guy texts you back, all of that is not within your control. And to attach yourself emotionally to an outcome that is not under your control is foolish. Brown suggests that we create input goals instead of output goals. Now basically what this means is that you create goals that are based upon what you can contribute personally, and not factoring in things that are outside of your control. The example is given of a game of tennis. Now when you're creating goals around playing tennis, some of us might say, well, I want to win the game of tennis. But you're not really factoring in the fact that the other player might play better than you. An input goal would be, I'm going to play this game of tennis to the best capacity that I have. And therefore, whether you win or lose, you've achieved your goal. And this is more poignant when we recognise that we can only ever do our best anyway. Brown suggests that we detach ourselves from what the Stoics called the indifference, those things that are not under our control, which as we've seen is pretty much everything. Prominent Stoic Seneca recommended that we mentally rehearse losing everything we have from time to time, So that way we build up resilience should the vicissitudes of fate come along and steal away our beloved, our child, our parent, our job. Brown points out an irony in this. By recognizing that the things that we love won't be in our lives forever, we can actually care about them more and stop taking them for granted. We may care about things a great deal, but we must also recognize the role that fortune, fate, life, whatever you want to call it, has its place, and that by accepting that some things won't last forever, this doesn't mean that we value them any less or that they lose their inherent meaning. If anything, the opposite is true. It simply means that we're aware of the role that fate plays in our lives and accept it. Nothing is so insidious and dangerous as anger, and Brown agrees, dedicating one of the longest chapters in the book to this most pervasive of passions. Drawing upon his heavy Stoic influences, Brown proceeds to give us an in-depth review of the utility of anger, ultimately concluding, as Seneca and Plutarch did back in the day, that anger no longer really serves our purposes, and we don't need anger to motivate us. Instead, it is better to cut anger off at the root, instead of letting it grow at all. By lowering our self-beliefs and getting off our high horse, by talking to imaginary friends, by resisting the curiosity to know what others think about us, we can start to avoid getting into this very perilous emotion known as anger. Brown encourages us to try and understand the motivations of the person that angers us, and also to recognize that most of the time, the thing that the person is doing or the quality they have that's annoying us is something that we also do or also have. Brown also encourages us to lower our expectations. Now, this is something that really didn't sit very right with me when I first heard it a few years ago, because surely life is too short to accept anything less than perfection, right? Well, perfection is a myth, and as Brown shows us, we're only really in control of our thoughts and actions, and to expect that the universe is going to rearrange itself in order to suit our whim is emotionally immature and also not accepting of reality. Remember our XY graph. We can still try our best, focusing on the things that we want in life, whilst also accepting the role that fate, fortune, destiny, what have you, play within our lives, and thereby mitigate much of the hurt, anger, and frustration that often plagues our short existences. In the final part of the book, Brown turns his attention towards death. It is all very well and good to live well, but to consider the end of everything you know, the way you see the world, can offer us keys to happiness and meaning within our current life, Brown suggests. Brown encourages us strongly to think about death, to face our death head on, to consider the fact that everything you know, everybody you know, your pursuits and endeavours, your dreams and aspirations are all going to amount to nothing. By considering this supposedly gloomy thought, we can again realise that our lives are short, and that we can hopefully stop taking them for granted. Brown considers what it would be like to be immortal. Initially probably quite exciting. We could pursue all kinds of things that we'd like to. We could become world-grade pianists, we could become the best tennis player on the planet. But ultimately, the fact that we could achieve anything would also slowly lose its spark. The meaning of life, Brown says, quoting Kafka, is that it ends. Any of you who've seen The Good Place know what I'm talking about as we watch those burdened with immortality slowly sink into mindlessness and despair. Our mortality, our death, it gives us contours to our lives. It adds shape and colour that would be rendered meaningless if we just lived forever. Instead, it isn't so much that we want to die, but rather that the alternative, living forever, would be even worse. And so we arrive at the realization that it is our death that gives us the motivation to get up in the morning, to risk saying I love you to somebody first, to start that business, or to just pursue a new goal or endeavour. Because this is it. This is life, and as they say, life is a play with no dress rehearsal. More than this, however, Brown reaches the astonishing conclusion that it's not just enough for us to die. Other people need to carry on living after we've died. Otherwise, all of the achievements and things we've accomplished won't really mean anything, and will die with us as well. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this is one of my favourite books of all time, and I really can't recommend it to you enough. So jam-packed is it with wisdom, wit and insight that I couldn't possibly hope to go through it all, and I've had to choose just the key elements that have really stuck with me since I first started reading it a few years ago. I can't recommend to you enough that you pick up a copy of this book, or even listen to the audiobook online, which is beautifully and wonderfully narrated by Derren himself. If you've read the book, then let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know what you think of this video in the comments below. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you next time, guys. Thank you so much for joining me.